while you're in town?
Okay, well, I came to launch to publicly present a book that I jointly wrote with my friends and colleagues. The first is Moses Ochonu, who is a professor of history at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee, and then Osman Agbo, who is a medical doctor and public commentator who lives in Houston, Texas.
Okay.
So it was his idea as Osman that would bring together a series of our essays and publish into a book. And you probably would ask, how did you get to meet? He sent me a cold email some years back and said he had been reading my articles and was fascinated by them, but wanted to find out who I was. You know, he joked that I just wanted to show you another spirit. So he sent me an email, and I'm a sucker for mellifluous prose. His prose was beautiful, and he's a medical doctor. So I responded immediately. And then he responded, and I said, okay, let's take this beyond email. Then he went to phone. And then from the phone, we had a Facebook group. Sorry, we had a Facebook post. And so he came up with the idea. He said, you have written a lot of great essays. And your friend Moses Ochonu was my classmate at Bayero University. He studied history like you, but he took minor courses in English and mass communication, where I also took courses from. So we be friends because of the common courses we took in two departments. And he's a professor of history. I've made references to him about our undergraduate education. So he said, I see that Moses is a friend. I also enjoy reading his articles. Can you connect me with him? I said, sure. So we became friends, and then he came up with the idea that we bring some of our essays together. But we also had a joint column, I would say, an occasional joint column called The Chat. So we just discuss a variety of issues in Nigeria. We take a topic, he'll pose the question, and then we'll give responses to that, and they'll be back and forth. We published some of that in the premium times. So the first part of the book is those chats, and then the subsequent ones are the. And then of course I was also invited by the Kwara State governor, and from Kwara State, he wanted me to talk to the youth about inclusive governance, how to get youth to participate in active governance, and what can be done to enhance that participation. And he didn't even tell me he was already doing that. So by the time I came, the youth commissioner welcomed me, and I looked at him. He looked like he was 28 or thereabouts, and I asked him, he confirmed that, yeah, he was. I said, okay, I've never seen a 20-something-year-old commissioner in Nigeria. And he said, well, I'm not alone. There are several such people. And the speaker of the House of the State Assembly is so a 30-something-year-old man who turns out to be someone from my area. So there are a lot of young people in the governance in Kwara State. And so I said in my mind, when I gave the speech, I had no idea that this was what I was going to encounter. I thought I was going to encourage the state to include the youth in governance. But yeah, so that's basically what my visit is about.
Okay. How easy was it coming up with the title of the book?
Oh, well, we decided that we should pick a pithy pidgin English expression. And we realized that in Nigeria, pidgin English, is a demotic language. A lot of people understand it, and it resonates on a very deeply personal and emotional level. So, and we were inspired by the example of our late friend Pius Ladusami, who wrote a book too, a collection of his essays, and the title was Nigerian the Carry Last. So, and it resonated with the Nigerian reading public. So we came up with that, and we debated, and it captures the dysfunctions of the country that we write about passionately. And it also captures the inequalities that pervade our polity. And so, which is basically the thematic preoccupation of our writings all through the years, center around these dysfunctions, the lack of equality, lack of opportunities for everyone, and also it encapsulates thought processes that people can quite give expression to. You know, like there's the expression, I'm feeling one kind. That is so pregnant.
Yeah.
You know, I'm feeling one kind. You can write 3 volumes explaining one kind. You know, that man is one kind. I'm feeling one kind. So there's a richness, there's linguistic richness to Pidgin English expressions that we haven't quite explored, because we think of Pidgin English as this inferior bastardization of pristine English, but it's not. And I wrote a book chapter that's coming out next year, where I defended Pidgin English as a language in its own right, with its own logic, with its own grammar, which is independent of English, although it draws inspiration from English, which is independent of our native languages, although it draws lexical content from our native languages. So it emerged from a mishmash of our native languages and the English language, and has an independent existence that does not need the approval of English to exist, to have legitimacy. So I'm a great fan of Nigerian Pidgin English and the depth of the proverbs and expressions. And so it reflected in the title that we chose. That's This Life No Balance.
Okay. Now let's go back to that issue of Kwara.
Yes.
You said, how are we sure they will not be drawn in with the rod that is already there?
That's a good question. And I have not studied their performance enough to make that kind of judgment. There are occasions where, from going there, I've discovered people became appointed to commissionership straight from NYSC. They just finished the NYSC and they're commissioners. There's a young man that I was with until I boarded my plane, and he just finished his NYSC. He studied computer science, and he was commissioner for information and communications. And he looked like he served the entire first term. So my guess that he's at most is in his early 30s. So I said, how did you manage to be a commissioner with permanent secretaries who are old enough to probably be your grandfather? And he said there was no crisis of any sort of confidence, and that the people respected him. And he, discovering that he's really young, that he was overly respectful, that even when he had disagreements with the ideas, he would say, you are right. And they would find subtle ways to make his point. And I saw a very intelligent young man. So I said, I see the wisdom in the commissioner and in the governor, appointing him as governor. The depth of his wisdom for his age was. So I just was curious. How could you be a commissioner and you are maybe 26 years old, and the permanent secretary is probably 55 or 60? How did you get along? I said he didn't have any problems. So I don't know. I think there are people who probably will criticize it and say they are not experienced enough to be commissioners of whole ministries, and I think that's a legitimate criticism. But I also think that it's revolutionary that he's thinking out of the box. And one of the good things about, well, good youth, young people, is that they tend to have a way of looking at the world that is different from those of us who have been in it and are jaded. So I'm hoping that someone would assess the performance of these young people in government. And there's something that's I discovered. It's not just young men, it's also young women. Okay? So I wish I knew this and researched it so that my approach would have been, how did they perform? What has been the effect of their participation in governance in the last 4 years that has happened? Has it had any positive effect? Has it transformed the state in ways that it hadn't before? Maybe that's the next thing that I'm hoping that journalists would explore, or even myself when I do my own independent investigation.
You've always been very passionate about Nigeria. I'm wondering, what each time you wake up and you reflect on the situation you find ourselves in Nigeria, how does it make you feel?
I feel horrible. And let me explain. They say your home is where the heart is. My heart is in Nigeria. I'm an American citizen, but my heart is in Nigeria, and I live in a country that works for the most part. And I know that Nigeria has the capacity to work as well. And I see people who head institutions, who make things happen in the United States, and I see that they're not smarter, they're not better. Some of them are not even half as smart as a lot of Nigerians that I see. The boundless creative and imaginative energies of Nigeria, worthy of respect and commendation, and I know that we have the capacity to make it work. And I think my being outside accentuates these anxieties. It makes me feel like we can be that way. It's possible to be that way. I mean, in all of Africa, you don't find a country with this rare collection of talents. Wherever we go outside, we excel, but when we come together, we don't, because we do not have a framework to even succeed, and it happens to be in our soccer team. So a lot of people ask me, why are you concerned when you can afford to not be concerned? And I said, these are emotional issues. Emotions are not subject to logic. That's why when someone is in love, for instance, you do things that makes it up. That's illogical. Why would you do that? And so for me, I have very deep emotional investment in Nigeria. And I frankly can't even help it. If I wanted to divorce myself from Nigeria, I can't. A lot of times I tell my wife, I'm done. This is just too much. After a few months, I'm back. So now, each time I say that, I say, okay, I give you 1 month, 2 months, you're going to be back. So because of that, I'm ashamed to even tell her that I'm frustrated. So she now she understands my saying, I'm done with Nigeria. This is too much. To me, that's just, it signalizes the depth of my investment in the country, how much I wanted to improve. So these are driving forces for my activism, for my participation, for my engagement, and I frankly can't help it. And I was telling someone, maybe it's because my umbilical cord is buried here.
In the last 8 years, your position about Nigeria has been clear.
Yes.
Now we've had a change of administration. In the few months of this administration, do you see any departure from the past?
Yes, I've seen some departure and I've seen some continuity. Departure in terms of motions, not movements. We tend to think that motions and movements are the same. We had a previous government that was in power for 8 years that never even filled something as easy as board councils. What do they call those things?
Board membership?
Membership of governing councils of federal agencies. And so, since the civil service is the engine room of governance is basically grounded. And I kept writing about it and hoping that someone would, because a lot of civil servants would reach out to me and say, we have projects to execute, but we cannot, because by law we need a board to approve of these things, and there's no board. So, and I thought this was a low-hanging fruit. First of all, use it to even reward people who supported the election. Constitute those boards and give chairman here. They're going to be happy. But even that, they couldn't do it. And so the engine of governance just basically grounded. That isn't happening now. I've seen a lot of appointments. You may criticize the appointment, and I have my own criticism of some of the appointments, but at least someone is doing some appointments are going on. I also see, someone in a way trying to create some symbolic presence. And the subject of my column 2 weeks ago was the presidential visit to the site of the accidental bombing of Maulud celebrating Muslims in
Kaduna.
Yes. If something similar happened, several similar such incidents happened during Buhari. He never as much as acknowledged that something like that happened personally. There was in Iran, a small town in Borno, the same Nigerian military bombed the place twice and killed nearly 300 people. And when I read it, I was overwhelmed with emotions, with grief. But the president did not even acknowledge it. In fact, the next day he traveled to the Gambia to solve their political problems there. And I wrote a column there, and I called his Gambian Gambits. And the only thing he did to acknowledge was to ask his aide to send a tweet that they regretted that, and that was it. No presidential visit of any kind. And but this time around, when something similar happened, the vice president visited there. Of course, it's an entirely different conversation. Why should they be bombing citizens, that frequently? That shouldn't happen at all. There's no basis, no explanation, no justification can warrant that. But at the same time, I have criticized the lack of compassion, leadership, lack of symbolic presence. If I see someone doing it, I think I'm determined to acknowledge that at least someone has gone there and apologized and said, we're going to compensate you, we are sorry that happened, that won't happen again. So in that wise, I'm seeing changes. But in terms of sensitivity to the needs of everyday folks, I don't see any changes. We are journalists here. There's a famous Kperogi journalist in the United States in the 1920s that I'm very fond of, whose name I'm struggling to recall now, but he exposed corruption in government and corporations, and even became a political activist, supporting politicians who appear to be progressive, who appear to have, he would support them, endorse them, write about them, but when they got to power, they became indistinguishable from people he criticized, and they themselves criticized. So he came up with one pithy expression. He said, look, power is what all men seek, and once they get it, they abuse it. It's the same story. So, all of them want to, so that's, and I've seen that also, that when people get into power, that their first priority is to themselves. Of course, there will be exceptions, and I'm sure people are going to say there are exceptions, but exceptions don't prove the rule. They just show that, well, they actually make the rule more potent. And so, like the more fuel subsidies, I've been a huge critic of that right from the beginning. And there were a lot of people, before it even started, in April, I wrote a column where I said that if Tinubu remove fuel subsidies, he's going to have a hard time governing. And I gave a lot of reasons. I live in the United States where fuel is subsidized. And right now, Americans are paying less for petrol than Nigerians are. And it doesn't make any sense when the minimum wage there is $8 per hour. And here, we have one of the lowest minimum wages in the world. Not just, we have the lowest minimum wages in the world. Salaries have not increased, people are suffering, and then you are increasing fuel prices because you say, well, you need to free up money to do other things. But well, what have they done since it has been released? That people are suffering, and it affects me because I come from a poor background. I have family friends whose quality of lives have almost died. So in that way, I don't see any difference. It's concerned with the everyday realities of folks. I don't see a difference. I just see the same people being self-interested, self-loving, and not caring about everyday folks. That's in that time, yes.
Okay, now this because when you look at the price, how do Nigerians buy and read it?
It's actually published in Nigeria.
Oh, okay.
And in the speech that I gave after the book launch, I said, we have published, Moses and I are academics, and we've published books in the United States. And one of the contradictions of that is we write books about Nigeria and Nigerians, and those books are not accessible to Nigerians because they are published by US publishers who target libraries and universities and people studying Africa in Europe. And the cost is so prohibitive that people here will not be able to buy. Book publishers are not even able to liaise with the publishers in the United States to publish. So when we came up with this idea, we said, well, let's sort of reverse that and look for a publisher in Nigeria so that the book will be published in Nigeria, sold to Nigerians in Nigerian bookstores. So Roving Heights Bookstore is the main distributor for this. So, and they have offices in Lagos and Abuja, and they distribute nationally. So yes, so it's accessible. It's just 10,000.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
That's good.
So how do you see I know you elections in the presidential and whatever.
Okay.
What are your views at that time, and how did you?
Okay. Well, maybe when I talk, you ask something more specific. The elections were, I would say, the outcome of the election did not shock me. At some point in June 2022, I actually wrote an article. I say President Bola Tinubu because I had come to the conclusion at that time, and that was the primary election hadn't taken place.
Yeah.
But from my sources, insider sources, I knew that he had won it because the Aso Rock, the intrigues of the Aso Rock cabal failed. Buhari clearly did not want Tinubu to be the nominee, and he hatched a plan to impose Ahmed Lawan, and it collapsed on that. And once I knew that had collapsed, I knew that he was going to win the primary election. And if he won the primary election, I knew he was going to win the presidential election. Why? Because the opposition was divided into three. You have Kwankwaso with 1 million plus votes, and you have Peter Obi, who would take the Southeast. And at the time, if you recall, when I wrote that Peter Obi would be a strong force in the election, people thought I was being naive. They said it's not social media. And I said, the pulse that I feel is more than social media. And social media itself is a reflection of what happens in the real world. And a lot of people who mocked me, who said I was being naive, who even said I was supporting Peter Obi because my wife was from Anambra. I honestly wasn't even thinking of those things. People are just over hypersensitive. But that turned out. He performed way better than a lot of traditional politicians thought he would. And then Atiku, of course. So that's the same coalition that was won in 2019. But of course, the conduct of the election itself was horrible, like most elections. And one of the things with Nigerian politics, even when they're going to win the election, they will still rig it, just in case.
Yeah.
That's why Obasanjo in 2003.
Yes.
He rigged Ogun State so much that there were way more voters than the registered voters. And he didn't need to do that because at that time his support in the Southwest was solid. Yeah. But he still needed to rig, and he felt that he needed to rig. Yar'Adua did the same thing, or what? It was done for him. Yeah. He was so ashamed by it that he came out to apologize. But that election, even if he slept without campaign, he would have won it. Why? Because Buhari was unelectable at that time. He was a regional champion. He was seen as a religious fanatic, and he himself did not even make any effort to expand his scope beyond the Muslim North. And even within the Muslim North, it was a Hausa-speaking Muslim North. He didn't even campaign in Kogi and Kwara and all those other places where there are Muslim majority. But he thought he would win the national election anyway. There was no way he could win it. And Yar'Adua knew that. Yar'Adua had acceptance in the Southwest, in the Southeast, in the North Central. And he himself is from Katsina. So he was going to divide the vote with Buhari. But he still went ahead and rigged so much that the man himself, who was the beneficiary of rigging, was so ashamed that he initiated the processes for electoral reforms that led to Jega emerging as. So, when people always make references to the poor conduct of election, the effective conduct of election to delegitimize elections, it's fine. But for me, and I know this got me into a lot of trouble with my friends and people who follow me, when I said, this election, yes, it was effective, but I don't see how Tinubu would have lost the election, even if it was free and fair and conducted properly. Why? Because the opposition, they would have decimated him almost effortlessly. It was divided needlessly. Well, maybe not needlessly, because I see the basis for people in the Southeast saying we want to be president at this point. We have supported PDP every year, in all election cycles, and in the three big ethnic groups have produced president. We are the only ones who are excluded. This is our time. And I see logic in that sentiment, except that politics doesn't always work that way.
So what do you see the Southeastern people are getting wrong towards their aspiration of producing the president?
Well, I just say they have not made the right alliances, and it's politics about alliance and about coalition, about realignment of forces and interests. It's not about morality. So if we want to bring a moral argument, you say, yeah, the Southeast should produce a president. Yeah, a strong constituent part of Nigeria. They have supported several candidates and have transcended their own ethnicity to vote for candidates that are not from their ethnicity. For instance, in 2003, when Ojukwu, who is like an iconic Igbo man, ran against Obasanjo, he didn't win any votes, and Obasanjo defeated him in Igbo land. So people who have that kind of history of supporting people for even outside deserve to be given a shot, but that's a moral argument. Politics is not about morality. So, but you learn from what the Southwest did. The Southwest had always been in a position for pre-independence, but the moment certain elements in the Southwest decided that, well, I think we need to be in the center. We've been in a position for too long. Now let's move to the center. What they do is alliance politics. Reached out to an unlikely person, Buhari, because Buhari is very provincial. He's extremely uninterested in anyone other than himself and his ethnic group. And in that, he has a concentric circle of preferences. Fulani and Kanuri, that's the first of him, which is because his father was Fulani, his mom was Kanuri. And then Hausa speaking people. And then maybe other Muslims. And then you have, so he has a circle, and he never makes any pretenses about that. He's always been that way. Right from the time he was serving the military. There is a permanent secretary of his, whose name I can't remember, it's Yoruba. He was a permanent secretary in the Ministry of Petroleum when he was petroleum minister during Los Angeles administration, first regime. And he said they traveled from Lagos to Germany, and they sat side by side each other. And Buhari never said a single word to him. And they went to the ambassador, who turned out to be a Hausa man, and they transacted official Nigerian business in Hausa, and he was excluded. He had no clue what went on. And then they returned to Lagos, and they still sat by side each other. He never said a word. He captured it in his autobiography. I'm trying to remember his name, and I referenced it in the previous column.
Oh, maybe I missed that one.
Okay,
so
yes.
I'll look for it.
Okay, maybe one I will look for it and
Okay.
I'll send to you. But that's the kind of person that Buhari. But that man who wrote that book endorsed Buhari in 2015 for the election. It's part of his knowledge of that. He had written a book before 2015 talking about his provincialism, his intolerance of people. He feels like fish out of water where he finds himself amongst people who are not Hausa speaking people. That's Buhari. So the Southwest still went ahead to have an alliance with him. It was strategic. You might call it opportunistic, but that's what politics is about. They say, okay, let's deliver you to the presidency, and in return,
It comes to us.
It comes to us. And he wanted to betray it, but it was too difficult for him to do, and he failed because the forces around him were beyond him. The people in the northern governors came out and said, this was the agreement we reached, and we have to respect this agreement. Should we fail this, we'll perpetually be people who would never be trusted in politics. So why would they do that? It was because they felt morally obligated to pay back, and that's the alliance politics I'm talking about. But if you have a moralistic posture to governance or a sense of entitlement, I deserve to be there, so give it to me. Even if I insult you, well, you have to understand where my anger is coming from. Just understand and give it to me. It doesn't happen that way. So I think that's where if the Southeast must get power, they have to understand the intricacies of politics, the necessity for alliances, for compromises, and for coalition building.
What's the have you seen his
His brand of politics.
His brand of politics. Well, it's still emerging. It hasn't quite taken shape. But I would say his appointments are a little too provincial for my liking. Not a little, but a lot too provincial. Although I've seen some recalibrations lately, but it is both Yoruba-centric and Lagos-centric. And I was discussing with someone from a Yoruba person from Osun State, and I said, why is eating all this? I mean, people in the north have, frankly, no moral right to complain because Buhari basically laid the templates. And his defense then was, I can only work with people that I trust. Which was a very lame defense, because why would you want the vote of everyone, but then you can only trust certain people? Yeah, so I mean that doesn't make any sense. So and that's why the North is not able to come out with the same moral clarity that it would have come out if Buhari was something different. That's why there's just muffled noises. But I had thought that Tinubu's I had been very critical of him, but there are certain things I admit about him, which is that he chooses his lieutenants very carefully, and he prioritizes competence in the choice of his of people who are around him, and that's why almost everyone you may disagree with them, you can abuse them, but you can never say the people around Tinubu are incompetent people. You can't say that of Buhari, because for Buhari the most important thing is your ethnicity, your religion. Whether you perform or not is of no relevance to him. But you can't say that of Tinubu. So I was hoping that he would use that sense to look for talents from all over the country within his inner cabinet to give it that sense of national outlook, particularly because he's himself the product of a very broad-based national coalition. He got more votes from the North than he did from even the Southwest. And as I say, the sense of shame that many Northerners felt because of Buhari's betrayal, a lot of, and I'm saying this thing for the benefit of my own deep inside knowledge. Yeah, a lot of Northerners who didn't even like Tinubu were ashamed by the nature of the betrayal that Buhari was hatching. So this is just not our nature. This is just not who we are. And you do this and you succeed, we will never be able to say anyone that we're trustworthy people. Even if you don't want to support this guy, at least don't sabotage him. You know, and that was something. So there are a lot of people who came out and supported him just for that fact. That someone cannot support you for 8 good years. Throughout those 8 years, Buhari did things that Tinubu should have criticized, but he never did. He was strategically quiet, and in fact was supportive in ways that endangered his popularity within his own home base. And then finally, like when Amotekun was launched, he hunted with the hair and so he wasn't quite. He wanted to show he didn't want to offend the people in Asura because they were already saying he was one that sponsored the Amotekun, and even the NSAS protests were all very stupid speculation. So yeah, I would say those appointments could be way broader than they are. But maybe he's going to change along the line. But I think we should transcend this if you have to build a nation. Let's have a president who, Obasanjo did that to a very large extent. His chief of staff was a northerner, Mohammed. And General Mohammed Abdullahi. A lot of people, and now Buhari has made us believe that to be a chief of staff, you have to come from the same ethnic group, you have to share the same values, you have to be someone. But that was not the template that Obasanjo left. And so it would be great to have a nation where the head of state trusts or the president trusts people from every part of the country enough to make them part of the teaching cabinet. So that's, I forget what the question was.
Yeah, I've also wondered how you cope with you're very on point, and I mean, I'm wondering how do you cope with the various
The truth is, in the last couple of years, I even stopped reading the responses Because one, there are too many to read. Two, I just realized that, well, in life I have made my point known, but let other people also make their point known. That's what life is about. And I'm a discursive Democrat. Discursive democracy is the right for everyone to speak, to say what they want. Some people will commend me, some people will condemn me, which is fine. In fact, variety is the spice of life. I've always told people, many times, people say, oh, I love your articles, but I don't always agree with you. And I say, I'll be worried if you agree with all the time. It means that you are not thinking. Because we are shaped by several things, by our circumstances. We are socialized different cultures, and they affect how we see the world. So how I see the world is not going to be how you see the world. And there are things that are factual. I can say, well, this is right, this is wrong. We can agree on that, but my interpretation of certain things will not be consistent with your own upbringing, and that's fine. And if I get you to tell me, maybe I'll say, okay, I see a point of view. And there are, frankly, occasions when some people call attention to certain things I've written that I feel really strongly about, but they are very persuasive in how they say it. And say, okay, now I see it from another point of view, and it changes my perspective. I'm never emotionally invested in any point of view. And once I am confronted with superior argument, I yield. And that's part of my training. Part of my training is that I question my own assumptions. What psychologists call being conscious of your unconscious. What is our unconscious? There are things that we have come to believe, or that we, not out of any effort. I'm a Muslim. My father was an Arabic teacher. That has an influence in the way I look at the world. I come from the part of Kwara State that is really underdeveloped, and where people don't go to school a lot. That shapes, how I look at the world. I went to school at Bayero University and studied mass communication. That sort of shaped how. So when I confront any issue, the first thing I ask myself is, do I think this way because of my background? That's the first thing I ask myself. And sometimes the answer will say, yes, that's why. And so I was okay, what if I were from a different background, how would I look at this issue? And then I realized that the perspective changes. So if you read my articles critically, find that struggle, find that I'm trying to transcend myself. And so a lot of times I get a lot of backlash from people who share my background, because how could you think this way? You are a betrayer. But I'm not a betrayer, I'm thinking from another perspective. I realize that other perspective makes more sense than the perspective that naturally comes to me. When Buhari, I'm actually personally known to Buhari, and I know many people who serve in his government. And Garba Shehu was my teacher, and we have very close personal relationship even before he got into government. But Pantami, Isali Pantami, he's my friend, with Communications Commission. Before he accepted it,
Minister.
Before he accepted
Science
the
and Technology,
he called me. He said I was one of 10 people whose opinions he was seeking before accepting the appointment. He said if I said no, he would not accept it. There were 10 people. And when he was an assistant professor at the University of Saudi Arabia with the friends, when he got the appointment as DG NICHDAD, he also reached out to me and told me that Buhari invited him and told him to. And what did I think? And I said, accept it, because, well, in the north, there's this false dichotomy between Islam or Islamic knowledge and Western education, and I said you can help bridge that. That someone can be an Islamic scholar and be a Western scholar and even serve in government and bring the examples on how things can be done. I say, if you are showing me that you're going to change how governance is done so that you inspire people who see this false dichotomy, I said that would be great. So I have this sort of relationship with him. But when he operated this professorial fraud, my natural inclination was to keep quiet. I said, he's my friend, I have access to him, I could tell him, don't do that, or whatever. But something was telling me, if it was someone else who is not my friend, what would I do? And I said, I would tear that person apart. Then I said, okay, why are you not doing it now? Because of friend. Then what moral justification do you have to criticize someone else? So it was a huge struggle for me. And I went at it. And it destroyed our friendship, but I'm happy that I did it because it freed my conscience. And what I've always said all the time is so long as my conscience is free, my opinion is not motivated by primordial consideration or because of my friendship with someone or because I have been paid. I have never been paid for any opinion I ever expressed. Never. And it's not because I haven't been approached by politicians who say, hey, want to be part of us? And I said, for me, I don't question people who do that because I realize that surviving in Nigeria can be very difficult. But I think I have conquered my needs. What I can't conquer, what no one can conquer is greed. Those two words rhyme.
Yeah.
But yes, need and greed. And once you meet your need, everything else you're looking for is greed. If I have my small car that takes me to wherever I go, and you have your huge SUVs, you have 10 SUVs, that's greed. The need is, you just need a car to take you from one point to the other. If you have a nice house where you sleep in one bed and something, you have conquered that need. But if you want to have multiple houses, and you want to have enormous bedrooms and all of that, that's greed. And it's okay to have some greed sometimes. But when you conquer your need, and you allow your greed to compromise even your principles, that's where I wouldn't do that. So I said, you say you want to be part of your campaign or to support your views, I cannot. There's no amount of money you give me that will make that much of a difference in my life because I already have all the needs that I have met. There's really nothing. Everything else you give me is just greed. So, and I have reached that, so no one can ever give me money to express an opinion. I can express opinions that sometimes align with the opinions of certain people. In 2018, people thought, oh, Atiku had employed me to attack. And by that time, I swear by God, I had never even exchanged the word with Atiku. Not one word. I didn't even know anyone who knew him. But people thought I was that I knew him. And I said, okay, when I was expressing opinions that appeared to be consistent with Buhari's opinions in 2014, was I also paid by Buhari? He didn't have it. Well, at least he said he didn't have money. You know, so that's my, frankly, my perspective. Perfection is not a human quality, so I'm not perfect. I have my own. You know.
Have you been harassed of recent or at any time, coming home or going?
No, actually, it was quite the opposite. A lot of immigration and custom officers actually recognized me from my Facebook photos, and they called my name and said they knew me and were welcoming me home. In fact, one custom officer said they didn't need to check my luggage, you know, the matching that I wouldn't take what didn't belong to me. And I joked that, hey, what if I did? He said, well, you can't afford to do that because, you know, a lot is at stake for you. So, but except that at one point, I think I passed through immigration, one guy was asking me a series of questions, and they reached out to his boss. I was eavesdropping, and at that point I was wondering what was going on. I said, I hope there's no problem. He said, no problem, and he left me. But other than that, I've had a very nice time, and people have been extremely nice, and I've encountered way more warmth than I anticipated when I came, to tell the truth.
Okay, Pius was alive. You had some program that he does. Do you plan that, or are you already doing something like that?
Well, I just started this year, that's what I would say, but
okay.
It wasn't something that I thought was something I was prepared to do. But there are many ways of my columns, I think, are my own ways of giving back to society. Of course, some people who don't like what I write will say no, stop writing, and we don't care. But I deeply feel that it's one of my ways of giving back to society by drawing from my experiences, my location, and my readings to share thoughts and perspectives that some people, I met some people in government who say, although you criticize us, sometimes we take things out of what you write that will be useful and we throw away the rest. And and I said, okay, that's very reassuring. That at least you take something out of it. So that's one of my ways of giving back to society. And of course, I do other things that I wouldn't want to expose.
Yeah.
I love education, and I like to help people when I can who are struggling to, go through school and all of that, because I deeply believe that getting someone an education is the best way to help them. And it's not just about getting a job, when you graduate. It's also about enhancing your mind, developing your mind. And we're living in an economy now where you really don't need, if you're very smart and creative and imaginative, you don't need a government job to survive.
So being a son of an Islamic scholar, how does that impact on your personality?
Well, I would say the first thing, my name, Farooq. My dad, maybe when I was 3, maybe 4, told me, do you know the meaning of that name? He said, it means one who distinguishes truth from falsehood. And the Prophet had caliphs as people's successors and companions. One of the companions was Umar ibn Khattab. Umar ibn Khattab was a brutally frank person, and he was so brutally frank that he would tell truths that were against himself. His son committed fornication, and the punishment for fornication was to be given 100 lashes of the cane, and they wanted to protect him. I said no, and he loved his son very dearly, and he said, let's try. And he said no, he had to be, even against his own wishes, against his own emotions, he allowed him to be. So that's why he was nicknamed Farooq, one who distinguishes truth from falsehood. And my father loved that quality of the companion, that he gave it to me, and he wanted me to be that way. So right from the time I was 3, 2, all through my life, you remember your name. So that effect, the effect it had on me is that we grew up, 3 of us. I have an older brother who died unfortunately 2 years ago, and I have a younger brother. And each time we did our shenanigans and we agreed that we would tell Dad, my dad would just say, I know Farooq, I know you won't lie to me. And then that will flatter him and I'll tell the truth. And then they say, you are a sucker. Because all the daddy has to say is Farooq, and then you expose us. So they didn't trust me because of that. And so I tell people when the emir of my hometown, and the Emirate Council come and said I should stop criticizing Buhari. And they had an Emirate meeting, and they put me on a loudspeaker and said, the community is saying that we are unhappy with what you are doing. We don't like it, we are sad, and we want you to stop it now. And my father had died at the time. He said, your uncle is here, please speak up. And he spoke. So, and I told her, I said, it's too late. They said, what do you mean? I said, because if my dad were alive, he would not even tell me to do what you're asking me to do. He brought me up to tell the truth. But if you can tell me that something I've said about Buhari was untrue, and you convince me, I will apologize. I said, people know me. I'm never shy to admit that I'm wrong and to apologize. I've done that several times. I've written some things that turned out not to be correct. And I admit that I found out that this is not correct, because that's just me. So if you tell me that I've said or written something about Buhari that was wrong, that was false, fine, that's a good conversation starter. I will apologize. They said, no, it's not about that. As a leader, you're not supposed to criticize the leader. I said, where did you find that? When I was criticizing Jonathan, I don't recall an Emirate Council meeting being held. Then they say, well, it's because they didn't know. I said, okay, well, you didn't know because you don't share the same religion with him. But that's not the way my dad brought me up. And so it's too late to change me at this late hour. Because, I'd ask my uncle, maybe he knows. So that's some of the ways that my upbringing has shaped me. Is that if I can tell the truth, then I won't say anything. And frankly, most times, I won't shy away from telling the truth. Even if it's against me, my friends, or people I, so those things really matter to me. And that's why I'm glad that I chose journalism as a profession. My first love was law. And my dad told me, lawyers are liars. And they are going to be held, It was a joke. But if it forced me to change, and I said, okay, the next thing I can be, apart from being a lawyer, is to be a journalist. And that was so from the very early stage of my life, I knew that I was either going to be a lawyer or a journalist. And then so it's all influence of my father, his Islamic teaching, and the importance of truth that he has imbibed in you. And when people say stop it, I say it's too late.
Have you ever had the thought of coming home out of the love you have for Nigeria to come fix things in terms of maybe joining politics or joining governance? Has it ever crossed your mind of the need to do that?
But not politics. Why? Because I frankly don't have the capacity to be a politician. To succeed in politics, you have to lie. You have to. Maybe I'm being overly broad here, but I've not seen many politicians who are truthful people, who are straight talkers, who don't deceive, who don't need to use a godfather or bribe people to get into positions of power. Maybe they exist, I just don't know them. And so that fears, I have fears that going there, I'm not going to make a difference. Also, I'm a strong believer in the notion that what you need to change first is the system. Like individuals can't change anything. So the system is superior to individuals. And historically, I've seen that in our kind of system. I've seen people who are very clear-headed, who are solidly ideologically situated, but they go into government and they are indistinguishable from the people that they have criticized. And that caused me to wonder, if are we like that as well? But of course, I realized that the problem is not with individuals, it's with the systems. So you go there, you have these clear ideas, but then everyone who surrounds you is different. And for wanting to be different, they want to even kill you. And you need to be alive, to fight another day. So a lot of people say, well, instead of dying, I'd rather go with the system. So I'm not sure that I want to be in politics. It's not something that I've ever thought about. But there are places that I can be part of. Like I have considered coming home at some point to teach in a university. And I frankly have come back earlier, but I have a 6-year-old daughter that needs me, and I know the importance of having a father because my father shaped basically who I am now. And a lot of people who read me say, and I say, well, because when my mom and my dad got divorced when I was maybe 9, he was basically my father and my mother. Although I had a stepmom, but he was everything, and most of what I have become, it's from him. So I think there's huge importance in being there for your children. So I have a 6-year-old. I frankly can't leave a 6-year-old and live there without a father. Going back and forth is just going to be very disruptive. So yeah, at some point, my desire is to return to Nigeria, and like Professor Farooq says, when you are here, you feel needed. There's nothing you are in America that somewhere is not 10 times better than that. There's just no one needs us. That's the feeling that we have. What is it that I'm bringing here that is not already in abundant supply? And here, the little contribution you make, find that people appreciate it and they want more. So this is really where I belong. And it's all kinds of circumstances that took me out of there, and the ultimate goal is to come back at some point.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.